Hi Booklovers, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to be talking about all the Mafia romances, the dark Mafia romances that I binged back in December, like late December and early January. I read about 9 books plus a novella. I went on a pretty deep binge. I was just craving all the Mafia romances, so that's what I read. I did finally read Cora Reilly, more of Cora Reilly, which I know a lot of you guys have been recommending to me, so I'll talk about that in a little bit. I found a new favorite series that I am so obsessed with, but yeah, these are all the dark Mafia romances that I read. These are gonna be dark reads, violent, all this crazy over-the-top stuff that I was just in the perfect mood for. The first book, the first series that kicked off my little binge was the Mafia Royal series by Rachel Van Dyken, and book 1 is Ruthless Princess. I read the prequel and this book. The prequel is called Royal Bully, and I sadly didn't love both of them. I gave both of them 3 stars. It has been a hot minute since the last time I read Mafia romances from Rachel Van Dyken years and years ago, back in 2013. I read her Eagle Elite series. I was actually still back in high school, but I remember really liking that series. I thought it was really interesting, really fascinating. This whole academy all for mafia people. Goodreads says I gave the first and second book 3.5 and 4 stars. But yeah, the whole Mafia Academy, Mafia College thing worked really well for me back then, but today it didn't work quite as well for me. The Mafia Royal series is actually a spin-off of that Eagle Elite series. It's about the second generation, all the kids. I vaguely remember all the main characters from the original series, but still it was a little overwhelming getting to know all these characters again, plus the new characters, the new kids. So if you want to go into these as standalones, as a new series, you can, but I would honestly recommend reading the Eagle Elite series first. It is a really long series. I mean, I only read the first 2 books, but there is a lot of stuff that goes on in the original series that does bleed into this spin-off series. So the prequel, Royal Bully, I did give 3 stars. I guess it's kind of a bully romance with the bully mafia hero. This all takes place at the same Eagle Elite University that their parents went to, that the original series took place in. It's a good girl, bad boy kind of mafia romance. Asher, the hero, is known as the executioner of their mafia family. He is Chase's son, and his heroine is one of his classmates. She is not involved in the mafia, so being with him and being around his family is like a culture shock. She's into Asher, but she's also terrified of who he is and of his family, and of course what he does for a living. It is fairly insta-lovey, especially on Asher's part, because he knows she's the one, but I mean, I don't mind that because it is a novella. The romance is really short, really quick and fast, but the whole mafia aspect does get a little bit too much in this novella. It's all packed in, all the family members. There's so many members of this family, because you not only get to know the second generation, you're also introduced to the parents too. So it was a little bit overwhelming even for me, someone who's read a couple books in the original series. I did like the romance, but there was an unnecessarily large amount of people getting killed. It was a little bit over the top and not in the best way, but this is a novella. It does set up for the first book, the first full-length book. Asher, the hero, is the one who is supposed to break up the couple in Ruthless Princess, because a relationship between these main characters, between Serena and Junior, is forbidden. And then for Ruthless Princess, I also gave this one 3 stars. It's like a childhood friends to secret lovers to enemies to lovers. There is quite a lot going on with this romance. This book pretty much picks up from where Royal Bully ended. Any sort of relationship between Serena and Junior is forbidden because their parents, all of the parents, have forbidden any sort of relationship to develop between the kids. Also, they're known as cousins to each other even though they're not blood related, so there's that. But Serena and Junior do fall in love and have this secret relationship that they keep from their parents. Serena is Nixon's daughter. Nixon was the main character in the first 2 books that I read in the Eagle Elite series, and then Junior is actually Phoenix's son. I didn't really understand the whole relationship between their parents because something happened in the original series that I don't think I ever got to. There is some sort of tension between their 2 sets of parents, but they do talk about it in this book, so it wasn't like I was completely lost. But at the start of Ruthless Princess, Junior and Serena are broken up, They now hate each other. They kind of have to hate each other because they're choosing their mafia family over themselves, over their love. They're always arguing with each other, getting into all this craziness, very stab happy. They're always shooting someone or stabbing someone. The whole mafia and violence aspect was a little bit cringy here, mainly because it's set in college and I don't think it meshed very well. It was kind of all over the place and just not as entertaining as I wanted it to be. I wish it could have worked better for me, but I mean, it was still an okay read. But also, I do love how gorgeous the Ruthless Princess cover is. The start of my Mafia romance binge was not the best, but then I read this next series that turned out to be my new favorite Mafia romance series. If you follow me on Instagram or Goodreads, you've probably seen me gushing about them already, but that is the Maid series by Danielle Laurie. I love the series so much that I immediately went to go buy all the paperbacks. There are 3 books so far, a 4th one coming out maybe later this year, hopefully later this year. I mean, yes, Amazon did give me like $20 credit, but still, Danielle Laurie was a new to me author. Book 1, The Sweetest Oblivion, was recommended to me a couple years ago. Didn't read her until 2 months ago because I saw her books were on KU. But yes, I am in love with this series. So book 1, The Sweetest Oblivion, I gave 5 stars to. It's been a while since I've loved a book or a series this much, but it was amazing. So good. This Mafia romance is a forbidden romance. Elena, the heroine, her sister is engaged to the hero, Nico. It's an arranged marriage. There is literally no feelings between the sister and Nico, so I mean, it's fine. But the reason why Nico, who is one of the Mafia bosses in New York, he's engaged to Elena's sister instead of Elena herself, because Elena is the older one. She was passed over because she ruined her reputation. She gave her virginity to someone else, some random dude. Her father found out and now she's ruined. So this Mafia world does kind of remind me of historical romance. The heroines having to be pure, lots of arranged marriages, marriages of convenience, and the women in these Mafia families, they don't have much power, don't have much agency, just like historical romance. Anyway, the romance, there is so much good tension and chemistry right from the start, right from when Nico and Elena meet. Elena has always been known as like the sweet girl, the one who always does what her family tells her, what her father tells her. So her being with that guy, it was her one act of rebellion, and it turns out Nico is the only one who brings out her feisty side. She is pretty much sweet to everyone except Nico. The banter between them is fantastic. Nico just can't take his eyes off of Elena, even though, you know, he's not engaged to her. Nico is the perfect obsessive, possessive alpha hero, and Elena just doesn't hold back from him, so they're such a fantastic couple. While I was reading this one, I was just dying to see how this engagement would play out, how they would break off the engagement, and how Nico would finally make Elena his. Also, Nico is tattooed. All the heroes in the series are tattooed, and it is so hot. Nico has like an arm sleeve. This book had me hooked. I loved it. I love the writing. So, you know, I immediately went to book 2, which is the maddest obsession and my favorite of the series. Gianna and Christian are perfection. Christian himself is my man. Of course, I gave this one 5 stars. I mean, I would give it 6 if I could. It's an enemies to lovers romance. We met Gianna and Christian back in book 1, and we could clearly see the tension and chemistry between them. They're always poking at each other. You can feel the animosity. It's so great. The maddest obsession is told in 2 parts. Part 1 is about the first third, and it's told in alternating timelines, the past and the present, and all the past chapters tell us about how Christian and Gianna meet for the very first time and the years since then to present day, and how their paths kept crossing throughout the years. In book 1, in The Sweetest Oblivion, Gianna was kind of seen as an airhead, as very frivolous, but in book 2 we definitely get to see a lot more beneath the surface. She's actually very smart and so strong. She's been through quite a lot in her earlier years. 7 years ago, which is when Gianna and Christian first meet, Gianna actually married Nico's father. She was forced to marry him. She didn't really have a choice, but she did try to make the most of it, even though her husband turned out to be a cheat and a liar. She met Christian on her wedding day, and he he has never forgotten her since the day Christian met Gianna. That was the start of his obsession. He does have a pretty obsessive personality. It's a bit like OCD. He is a very cold and ruthless kind of man. He is actually an FBI agent, but he's a dirty one because he does work with the Mafia. He's like an independent killer, so he's very powerful. And if you love the whole morality chain thing where the hero hates everyone except the heroine, Christian is your guy. He doesn't care about anyone except Gianna. He places Gianna above everyone else, and I love that. Part 2, which is present day, is when things start to heat up. We've seen Gianna and Christian circling each other over the years, hating each other, wanting each other. So this time Christian is finally claiming his woman. He is the perfect dark hero who lives and breathes for his heroine, for Gianna. Like, I thought Nico was alpha, very possessive and obsessive, but he doesn't hold a candle to Christian. I love Nico, but Christian is just on a whole other level, and I just love the way that he worships Gianna. The third and latest book in the series is The Darkest Temptation. This one is Mila and Ronan's book. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I didn't love it quite as much as the first 2 books, but it was still super good. It's a kidnapping mafia romance. We have Ronan, who is actually Christian's brother. He is like the mafia boss in Moscow and Russia. He ends up kidnapping his enemy's daughter, but she doesn't know that she's kidnapped at first. Mila actually goes to Russia to learn more about her father, about her family's history. She has no idea that her father is involved in the Russian mafia, so she just goes there and ends up getting attacked, but saved by Ronan. What she doesn't know is, of course, Ronan set up the whole thing. Ronan woos Mila, pretending to be this normal, regular guy and not at all some mafia mobster. Mila actually starts to fall for Ronan, and you can see Ronan also falling for her, but being a little tortured over it. He starts to get possessive over her, but then the whole thing does come out with Ronan kidnapping Mila and not letting her go until he can exchange her for her father, which is who he really wants. Mila becomes his prisoner, and they're both tortured over each other because they shouldn't want each other, but they do. The romance is pretty quick in the beginning because of the whole wooing thing, but then once the kidnapping starts, it does slow down. There's a lot of angst and tension. We get to learn more about Ronan and Christian's pasts. The romance worked out really well for me. There is a bit of groveling at the end because, I mean, Ronan did kidnap Mila. I really love these two. I love that Mila was so strong. She never let Ronan break her. Instead, she ended up breaking him. It was great. It was also really hot. I mean, all the books in the series are hot, but I think this one might have been the hottest. I mean, they're all really steamy. So it's a fantastic series. I mean, it was in my top 3 of my favorite books of 2020, so I love them that much. And then I read an A. Zavarelli, a Mafia romance. It's part of her Boston Underworld series, which I have read. I read the first 2 books, which I have in this pretty hardcover, and I also recently got Reaper. I enjoyed these ones a lot, but I read book 3, Ghost. It does start off pretty rough. It's a very dark mafia romance. The heroine is sold into sex slavery by her boyfriend. She is raped and abused on the page, so pretty rough to read. She is pretty much broken by the time that the hero, Alexei, comes in and saves her. Alexei is in the Russian mafia. He's like a second in command kind of guy. He was actually asked by the hero in book 1 to find Talia, and because he's this professional hacker, he's able to find Talia and get her out, but instead of handing her over to the hero from book 1, he ends up marrying her. It's a marriage of convenience. There is no love between Talia and Alexei. Alexei tells Talia that he will never love her, but he will offer her his protection in this marriage. But unfortunately, Talia is very broken. She's very empty. When she goes to live in Alexei's house, she has suicidal thoughts, but slowly, day by day, she does begin to heal. If you love your tortured characters, this book would be perfect. There is so much heartache going on in this book. I was hurting for them, especially for Talia. I really enjoyed the romance here. I loved her main characters. It's very slow going, but I mean, it does make sense. The mafia aspect was really great as well. It's all about the Russian mafia instead of the Boston underworld like the first 2 books were about. So yeah, this was great. Another great addition to the series. I did really like the first 2 books, and I gave Ghost 4 stars. And then I finally read Ruthless People by by J.J. McAvoy. The series has been on my TBR for years. I know a lot of people love this book, love the series, and I ended up enjoying it a lot as well. I gave it 4 stars. It was so very over the top with the whole mafia thing, with all the killings and the violence, but it was over the top in a way that was very entertaining, and it definitely worked for me better than it did with that Rachel Van Dyken series. This book is set in Chicago between 2 mafia families, the Italians and the Irish. Melody, the heroine, is the daughter of the Italian mafia leader, and Liam has just inherited the leader position of the Irish mob. This book is a marriage of convenience kind of romance. We have our 2 families uniting over this marriage. Liam thinks he's getting a biddable, easy wife, but no, Melody is not that. She's the complete opposite. She's actually been running the whole Italian mafia instead of her dad, who's actually been sick. So she has been top boss for a couple years now, unbeknownst to everyone else. Melody is a killer, she's ruthless, and she has quite the high body count. I loved Melody right from the start. She is a boss ass bitch, and she has no time for any of Liam's misogyny. She literally shoots him the first time that they meet. There's some great chemistry between them, but they do kind of hate each other. They do not get along. Liam did come off as a whiny brat though, because he was just so unwilling to compromise. He kept wanting Melody to just sit back and let him take control, but Melody is like, no, that's not how I roll. So this book is Liam and Melody learning how to be husband and wife, how to be partners, and how to share in this power that they have together. Their relationship is pretty much love-hate. They are both very nuts, but they work together as a couple. It was a great first book. I mean, I don't really have that many complaints. There were some random chapters with point of views told in some other side characters, but other than that, it was great. I definitely want to continue on with the series. I think there's also a spin-off series about the children. I'm not sure, but it was a great mafia romance. Lots and lots of action in this one. And now onto all the Cora Reilly books that I read. I mean, I didn't read that many, but I did binge on a couple that you guys recommended. I technically read 3. I did read a 4th one, but kind of DNF'd it halfway. I have read Cora Reilly before for the Ravished by Romance book club that I host. We read Sweet Temptation, mainly because it was a standalone, but it is also involved in this whole mafia world. I was not the biggest fan of it. I gave it 3 stars, so it was okay. I didn't love the writing, so I was really hesitant to continue reading more of Cora Reilly, but a lot of you guys love her and kept recommending that I read more of her books or read some other series of hers, so that's what I did. I first read Bound by Honor, which is the first book in her Born in Blood Mafia Chronicle series. I ended up liking this one more than Sweet Temptation. It's like 3.5 to 4 stars. It wasn't amazing, but I did enjoy it for sure. This mafia romance is another marriage of convenience between Arya and Luca. There are 2 mafia families in this series, the Chicago outfit and the New York famiglia. So the marriage of convenience is trying to unite these 2 families. Arya is the daughter of one of the bosses of the Chicago outfit, and Luca is the new capo, the new top boss of the New York famiglia. So even though he's really young, for a capo, he's only 23, everyone answers to him. This world is that fairly typical mafia world where the women don't really get involved as much. They don't have as much power. They are used a lot as bargaining chips, which means Arya has been given to Luca since she was 15, but they don't actually get married until she turns 18. She doesn't want to. I mean, she's terrified of Luca. She's terrified of this top mafia boss, which is understandable, but they get married and nothing really happens. She continues to be terrified of Luca. The entire first half of the book is just setting up the whole marriage, which means there is 0 romance. And one thing that I've noticed in the books that I read from Cora Reilly, 3 of the 4 books that I read, the entire first half of those books has 0 romance. Like, I do not feel a single thing between the main characters at all, which is not exactly the best thing to read in a romance. But yeah, there is 0 romance in the first half of this book, which means that the whole cheating thing in Bound by Honor didn't really bother me all that much. It's a slight spoiler, but I already knew about it before I read this book because of all the reviews that I saw on Goodreads. Luca does sleep with another woman at the beginning of his marriage because Arya doesn't want to sleep with him. It's not an excuse or anything, but it still happens. But Luca does promise never to do it again, and he doesn't. I will admit I would have loved a little bit more groveling from Luca, but that's just me. So I did like this one better than Sweet Temptation, but not necessarily because the story was better. It was definitely more the writing, because I did not like the writing in Sweet Temptation, and it was all telling and no showing. It was better in Bound by Honor for some reason. But yeah, the story was okay. I did like Arya and Luca together, but Arya doesn't really do much. But once the romance picks up, it does get a little better, mainly because Arya does play the more angel role in Luca's dark life. I'm leaning towards the 3.5 star for this book, though it is fairly close to a 4. After I finished this one, I figured I would continue on with the series, so I tried reading book 2, Bound by Duty. In Bound by Duty, we are back in the Chicago outfit. So this hero is Dante, the capo of the outfit. He is Arya's father's boss. He is the top boss in Chicago, and he is a widower. His wife passed 4 years ago from an illness, and he's never gotten over her, but it's about time for him to remarry so he can sire an heir. And he ends up marrying in another marriage of convenience to Val, who is a widow. Both of them are widowed, except Val was not in love with her husband like Dante was in love with his wife, because Val's husband was gay. She was a beard for her gay husband, which means of course she's a virgin, but she does agree to this marriage of convenience. I mean, she doesn't really have that much of a choice, but she goes into it knowing that Dante will never love her because his one and only love passed. I made it to about halfway through this book before I DNF'd it because I just couldn't really go on and couldn't deal with Dante. I did not like this guy. He's another cold, unfeeling hero, but he literally does not show any emotion to Val. He offers her protection and his body, but barely. And that's about it for the entire first half. And I know earlier I said, like, these books, these Cora Reilly books, the first half of these books have zero romance, but I feel like from the second half that I skimmed, this one made it to about 70-ish% where there was zero romance. I mean, yes, Val does fall for Dante for some reason that I don't understand, but there is nothing from Dante from what I could tell. I like a good cold hero, but only when he's cold to everyone but the heroine, and it was just too frustrating in this book, so I did not finish it. I skimmed the second half of this book, so I'm not rating it, but if I did have to give a rating, it'd be like 1 or 2 stars. Also, the writing here sucked once again. It was like the writing in Sweet Temptation, where it was all telling, no showing. So I don't know what's going on with the writing and why it's so different between books. After this book was when I asked my followers on Instagram what Cora Reilly book I should try next. There were a lot of varying answers, but most of them suggested the Cora Chronicles, but books 2 and 3, so I read those too. A couple people did recommend Luca and Arya's second book because I did like them in their first book, but I just went with the Cora Chronicles, books 2 and 3 specifically because people said to skip book 1. Book 1 is actually about Arya's little brother who was introduced in that first book, but I just was not interested in reading that. Normally I do love reading in order, but with Cora Reilly I just did not really care anymore, so I just picked the ones that hopefully I would enjoy. So I read Twisted Emotions next. That's book 2 in the Cora Chronicles series. The Cora Chronicles is kind of a spin-off of the Born in Blood series. It does add a new Mafia family to this world. We had New York and Chicago, but now we have the Vegas Cora. And apparently since those first 2 books in the Born in Blood series to this Cora Chronicles series, everyone hates each other now. All the alliances that were formed in those first 2 books that I read are completely gone now. I have no idea what happened, and I don't really care to know what happened. But yeah, they all hate each other. But in this book, the Vegas Cora are trying to form an alliance with the New York Famiglia, and that's where our hero comes in. Nino is the second in command of the Cora. His older brother is the capo. Nino enters a marriage of convenience with Luca's cousin, Chiara. Chiara is chosen mainly because her reputation is ruined because of her father, and now she is terrified of men, terrified of Nino because she was raped as a child. So when they marry, Chiara does let Nino know that he is free to sleep with other women because she doesn't want to have anything to do with that, so he does. This all happens in the first half of the book, where again, barely anything happens between the main characters. I did have some high hopes for Nino when I realized he was that kind of hero where he's unemotional, very cold, very logic driven, believes he can't fall in love, but he was just an okay hero. I didn't really fall in love with him or Kiara. There's really not much development with his character. I would have loved some more and definitely would have enjoyed the book a lot more if that happened, but the book was focused more on Kiara and her traumatic past. But I will say my favorite part about this book is the relationship between the Falcone brothers. Nino and his three brothers all live together in the same house. Family is everything to them. I did love the dynamic between the brothers. I was very intrigued by Remo, the capo. His book is next. But overall, this was an okay read. I gave it 3 stars. It had similar vibes to Sweet Temptation, which meant that I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. It did have a lot of potential, but it just fell flat for me. And then finally, the last book that I read in this Mafia binge was Remo's book, Twisted Pride. This is book 3 in the Cora Chronicle series. And finally, this was the book that I loved from Cora Reilly. I gave it 4, maybe 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this one. The writing was great. It was so different from all the other books that I read, except for maybe Bound in Honor, which is probably why I enjoyed it so much. Of the books that I read, this one is definitely the one most worth reading if you're new to Cora Reilly. It is another kidnapping romance, not the first in this binge of mine. Remo, who is the oldest Falcone brother and the capo of the Camorra, he decides to kidnap a bride. Serafina is from the Chicago outfit. She is actually the cousin of the capo, so she's Dante's cousin, Dante from Bound by Duty. She ends up getting kidnapped by Remo on her wedding day in her wedding dress that ends up getting all red and bloody. It was a great kidnapping romance. Serafina is a resilient heroine. She wasn't delicate like some of the other heroines. She never really played the damsel in distress. I loved her gradual transition from believing that the Camorra, that the Falcone brothers were all evil, that they were her enemies, to knowing that they are just this really great family of 4 brothers who would do anything for each other, who would die for each other. So she falls for not just Remo, but also his family. Remo himself goes through a little bit of a thing. He's always been the hot-headed one, a bit wild, acting on his emotions, never hesitating to hurt people. But with Serafina, he hesitates. He can't bring himself to hurt her. He becomes very possessive of her. I just loved both of their character developments. There is a bit of a surprise towards the end that might turn off some people, but I didn't mind it. I thought it worked, though the ending I do feel was a little bit rushed. Overall though, it was great. I'm so happy that I finally read a book that I really enjoyed from Cora Reilly. I wouldn't say that I'm now super excited to read all of her books now. I'm honestly not sure what I want to read from her next, but it was a good one. I definitely prefer the Camorra over the other 2 families. Also, surprisingly, considering that I jumped around all these books, it wasn't really that hard to understand all these different Mafia families, so that is a point for Cora Reilly. I can't say that I love that every couple gets like 2 books, even after a happily ever after in the first book, because I know Arya and Luca have a second book, Nino and Kiara have a second book. I may read Luca's just because I'm interested in what happened in Sweet Temptation. Those 2 timelines kind of run into each other, but those are all the Mafia romances that I binged late 2020, early 2021. I'm sure I'll go through another craving for more Mafia romances, so if you have recommendations, please share them. If you want some of my recommendations, I have a Mafia romance books video. All my favorite Mafia romances are there, so go check it out if you haven't already. If you've read any of these books, let me know your thoughts. Hope you enjoyed this video. All the links for the books that I mentioned are down in the description below. I'll see you all next time. Bye!